Hello and welcome to our series, Foodways. I'm Chef Renee, Executive Chef at the AGO. Joining me today is Chef Selwyn Richards. He comes to us from a long career bringing food to the table in Toronto. And I really just want to talk to him about his experience with food and his approach to food throughout his years and decades being on the food scene here. Thank you for joining us, Chef.
Thank you so much. You just made me feel real whole, but there you go.
I'm glad for that.
Right. Well, my pleasure. I love food, I love good food. And I think it was interesting because we did a wedding last week and the owner of the banquet facility came and he says, I said, do you want to try our meal? And he says, you know what? I've eaten already, but by looking at the presentation, I can tell it tastes amazing. And he said, when you take that much time to make it look this good, it has to taste fantastic, right? So I was really proud of the way people recognize the effort that we put into our craft.
Totally. It is a craft. It's a skill set that we're fortunate to have and be able to teach people. We've both been in the industry a long time and have not crossed paths, but I'm sure.
Well, you don't look as old as I feel. But
don't worry, I feel just as old inside. But I wanted to just really sort of dive into some of what brought you to this point in your career. Is there a place that you can remember or a time when you remember that really just said, wow, food is something special? Was it when you were a child, or was there a point in which you just really grasped onto the concept of food being something to bring people together?
I get asked this a lot, and part of the my answer is pretty much the same. I grew up with a mother that liked entertaining, that whole Caribbean kid, and Saturday was soup day, and as a kid we were quite finicky. I didn't eat much of anything except we eat bread and rice and chicken. That was the staple for us, me and my brother, really. But we weren't really adventurous in the other stuff, and I guess that's true for most kids. But she liked entertaining, and she liked entertaining with all the cultural food and stuff. So my house was really in the weekend, especially a revolving door where her siblings or just neighbors or family, on a Saturday, they would always come for their bowl of soup, but there was always Sunday dinner as well, you know. And then I got into food by accident, really, because I didn't have soup. And at one point she gave up and making something extra for us. So I would always start it with a fried egg sandwich. And then I noticed everybody liked my sandwich. I would add tomato, lettuce, mayo, all that stuff. And eventually I got bored with that. So I would take a bit of the chicken from Sunday dinner that was marinating and do my fried chicken. And of course, everybody wanted to try again, So once I left Jamaica and migrate to Canada, my focus really was going to study electrical engineering. And it started that way, and I ended up a dishwasher and being around the food again, my little part-time job, washing and cleaning up. I hated it, but I like being in the kitchen and just seeing the food and the memory, nostalgia of how my mother would be so busy preparing a nice meal. Mm-hmm. So I think that was the segue. I didn't last too long as a dishwasher because, I really wanted to start learning some of that skill. And once I started it, I just figured, well, it felt natural. I felt like I could do this. The problem I had is I was going to tell my mother, as a Caribbean kid, I wasn't going to study engineering. I was going to be a cook. That wouldn't go over very well.
That's a challenge I think we've all faced in some way. I know I did as well, that university wasn't in my cards either, but I really, really loved being in the kitchen, and that was not always looked up to very much or rewarded.
Right.
But I think many years of perseverance, we both come out on top of the situation.
Yeah, for years, it took me for years, to actually, I remember I was sous chef at the CN Tower, and I took my mom for dinner one night. And, being back then, the whole VIP rolled out stuff from we entered, chef this, chef that. And, they really made her feel like a queen. Oh, chef mother, and the pampering and all that. And I remember we were sitting there and I looked at her and could see, like, finally she was like, wow, this is my son. And at that point, I was at peace that I made the right choice, because she was so proud about what I've done with, with food, right?
You've been an ambassador, let's say, of Caribbean food for such a long time. You have a cookbook, you've had appearances on TV shows, and really have sort of been out and been seen and visible for decades. Still with being a promoter and a visible presence for Caribbean food. How have you seen that landscape change over the years? Like, have you seen what is it like 20 years ago compared to now? Is there a landscape, a culinary landscape? Do you think it's changed? Do you think it's evolved? What are your thoughts on that?
It certainly has evolved a lot. It came a long way from everybody, like even just referring to Caribbean food as a beef patty, and see where the humble beef patty has gotten to now. Like, I mean, pretty much doesn't matter what your ethnicity is, you probably know of a beef patty, But Caribbean food, I think what has happened with tourism is that the more that they got people going into the Caribbean to vacation and start trying the food and the resort and the street, and then realize that flavor. So when they come back now, they're craving that. So I think one of the big challenges that we have as a community right now is that there's tons of Caribbean restaurants, but we still haven't mastered the heart of the dining part of it, where it could just be like a date night. You take a date and you go. There's a few restaurants that's good that can do that or whatever, but generally speaking, that part of it needs work.
Is a segue, you mentioned restaurants in Toronto. What are some restaurants that you would, that are top of your list, that are places that you would be like, yes, you have to go there? If I say Chef Selwyn, where are we going? Where are some places that you would say, yes, these are must-have?
Well, I tell you what, I I get asked that a lot, but the thing is, we as chef, I could make the best meal, and everybody's falling over themselves. What a meal! And then at the end of it, I'm looking for a little hole in the wall to have breakfast at midnight, or whatever, and they look at you like you're crazy. Like, what? But I think when we go back to comfort food,
Love it. Love comfort food.
yeah, we want that stuff that just hug your soul and tell you, yeah, it was okay. Yeah, I got you.
Everything's going to be all right.
It's gonna be all right. It's gonna be all right. And I think there's lots of great restaurants in and around Toronto from all walks of life. And I want to say, like, because I believe every culture has that one dish. That's the umami moment. When you tasted it, it sets your soul on fire. But it's just to find that one dish that everybody makes. Might not look pretty, but when you taste it, it has the ability to transport you to somewhere else.
Of course.
Whatever. So there's a lot of nice restaurant that we can go to, and I think it's a moment thing. What do you feel for at the time? What are you craving? And that's one of my little pet peeves, is that if I'm looking for a lobster, I really don't want a shrimp.
What? They're not the same?
You just feel like at that moment, I never really achieved that fully, and stuff. And, so with me and going out, I like going out to eat to different restaurants. And I'm never there to judge the food, which is people thinking, you're Chef Selwyn now, he's gonna critique or whatever it is. But that's never my objective. My objective is to have a good meal, you know, and hopefully if it's gonna be a surprise, it's a pleasant one,
Mhm.
you know. So I'm not looking for you to reinvent the wheel or whatever it is. Just basically whatever was advertised or however it is,
Mhm.
let me capture that
It's a
moment.
consistency thing, right? For me, it's that like, does somebody know how to season well? Do they understand flavor and balance? And it's not
Right.
it doesn't have to be this wow aha moment as long as it is good and the first bite and the last bite taste equally as delicious. To me, that's something that is like,
So we're on the
of
same page, you know, we're
course,
definitely on the
of,
same page.
of course. If you could or needed to create one dish that really just touched on that taste of place and that emotion that we bring through food, is there a dish, a specific dish that you would just be like, this is the dish that emotes the taste of place that it's supposed to be from, that people will understand that and really just grab onto it?
Um, yeah, I think I've had that dish.
What is it?
You know, I've had that. I had a red snapper escovitch on the beach with you know, festival or fried dumpling or whatever it is. And
Mhm.
it wasn't just about one of those aha moment. It was a little hot on the beach, you know, in Hellshire in Jamaica. And under the sunlight, yeah, I mean the skylight and moonlight. But you felt if you were gonna die after a meal,
That's the
I
one.
could deal with this one, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it wasn't that it was prepared in a gourmet kitchen or whatever it is. It was just a little hot, freshly caught, came in, and I don't know what they did in it. But as you said, you know, they put their foot in it or or whatever. But definitely, you know, and I've been trying to relive, you know, that one moment again.
Mhm.
Because like I mean, as I said, everybody does something that's great. So if I'm in Jamaica, I'm thinking my thing is breakfast, you know. I would like to have hacky and saltfish and a fried dumpling, a cup of Blue Mountain coffee overlooking the ocean. And again, I feel, yeah, I'm good for now.
Mhm.
You know, I'm good
You're
for
in a
now.
good place.
I'm in a good place.
Yeah. Tell me about Acton Saltfish. Tell people that are going to be watching this what is it and what makes it so special and what makes it such the dish that just takes you where you need to go.
Yeah. Well, haki's, you know, it's actually a fruit, not a vegetable. But again, I guess it's one of those migration that came from West Africa. And depending how you treated it, some of us, some people see it as being poisonous. Others look at it and says, well, you know, wow, this is the best fruit that ever been invented or or grown tree. And it's actually Jamaica's national dish. And it's paired with saltfish. So back in the day, Canada would trade with Jamaica, so they would give them saltfish from, you know, salted cod from Newfoundland or wherever in exchange for rum, you know. So they would bring back the rum, happy, and then they would give them some saltfish and they would pair that with the ackee,
Mhm.
you know, and then that was a perfect bite, you know. So ackee is this thing that grows on the tree. It looks like scrambled egg when you make it, and when I make it, I tend to use smoked salmon because again, I'm lazy and I don't want to go through all the processes of, you know, and salting the fish and cooking it and all that thing, right? So Within 5 minutes, my prep is done.
Smart. I'm not lazy. That's smart.
Yeah,
Efficient.
right, as opposed to the other way, you know.
Mhm. And there's something to be said though for doing things as long as we have and being able to find efficiencies, right? We're finding ways that make a dish, it almost makes it more Canadian or more something that is from this place as it's
Right,
evolved,
right.
right?
And I think that we have to like the same hacky dish now. So you know, I have a dish that I call hatki and smoked salmon vol au vent, right? So I can actually charge you $10 more because it's feel very French and you know and refined type thing.
Mhm,
But pretty much, it's me just deconstructing it and saying,
mhm,
okay, here we have the haki, and rather than the saltfish, I'm using smoked salmon, and rather than the dumpling, I'm using the Balawan shell. So
mhm,
really, it's a play and the same saltfish and haki and dumpling, but I've just put in the experience that I've gained
mhm. Of
together and trying to elevate it to a different level.
course. I think that's special that bring together of different knowledge and preparations,
Right, right, right.
for sure.
And it shows too that like it's learned behavior, right? Because you know, we should be able to do these things better because we have the experience,
Mhm,
you know, and culturally across the board, you know, food is food, right?
mhm. I appreciate when there's the ability to be able to take cultures and meld them together. One of the things that we do here for wedding clients is we have a wedding coming up very soon. That is two very different cultures, and being able to create a menu that really feeds both of their souls,
Right, right,
and gives
right.
them the experience that they've always dreamt of and flavors that they've always dreamt of, but combining. It might be Chinese and Italian, right? There's
Yeah,
so many
and
similarities though, right?
I think as chef,
Yeah.
it's you know, for me, I like walking into your kitchen. Well, not you per se, but you know, people kitchen and they says, "Well, I have nothing to make," and then you open the fridge and the cupboard and you make them this meal, and they're like, "When did you go shopping?"
You had it all.
You had it
I do that
all,
to my
right?
parents all the time.
You know, you had it all, right? But
Mhm.
and for me, that's a beautiful moment because you're using ingredients that's available to you to create something special.
Your article about food of our fathers. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, how did you do the research and this all come about? Tell everybody that's watching a little bit about this article.
Yeah, Food of Our Fathers, I think it came to me from the Ontario Black History Society had asked me to do a piece, you know, and our cultural food, Caribbean, Africa, and whatever it is, and how did we get here?
Mhm,
And I mean, so I set out on this journey to look at how, uh, you know, say Caribbean food on a whole, how did we get here or whatever? So you look at Jamaica and it's a melting pot of culture. Their thing is called out of many one people. That's their motto. So everybody brought something with them. You know, curry is very big. You know, that came from India with the Indians when they come, Middle Eastern. So, like, I mean, even roti and the curry goat, the goat is a really take on lamb, you know, from the Middle East and stuff. But overall, again, back in the days with the plantations and all that, they didn't get the best of anything. They got leftovers, right? So you got the heads, you got the tails, you got the offal, as we call them, the feet and stuff. And then what do you do with that? So they were able to take all the throwaways, you know, that we would just discard and stuff, and make that into a meal that's fall off the bone goodness, finger licking, to die for. And that's the same food that we're celebrating now.
Mhm.
So with the migration of immigrants throughout whatever diaspora, wherever they end up, they brought all this stuff with them
Mhm.
and were able to massage that flavor out of it to make it something phenomenal. You know, you take oxtail, for example. You know, when I started out as a chef, oxtail was something you either throw in a stock pot or you throw it away, right? And I mean, a friend of mine was telling me that oxtail costs $18 a pound in Miami. $18 a pound for oxtail. That's ridiculous. But again, it's demand and stuff. So being able to like make that stuff low and slow, full of flavors, and just have it fall off the bone and kiss your soul,
Mhm.
was what the ancestors were able to do, you know.
If you had one place, I know I asked you about restaurants specifically of a certain culture. Is there one place in the GTA that you would say this is your must-have go-to for anything that is maybe not even Jamaican or culturally specific to what you love and do on the daily? Is there some place that you just want to give a shout out to that really just does something really well, that that cooks from the soul, and that really just gives us the opportunity to feel that tasty place?
Well, I would still have to put it into compartments, like for me, not because I've worked at the CN Tower. I spent 5 years there, as sous chef, and believe me, it was baptism by fire, you know, and I'm glad that I survived that. And I think that was the catalyst for preparing me for my future, really, in that you don't think you could get any worse or any eclectic in
Crazier.
terms, right, in all of those pieces. But I like that restaurant because I think it's the best date night.
Mm.
You know, where else can you sit and you see the whole city, you know, up in the stars, really,
Mhm.
as a ambience, a backdrop, you know, to me, that's priceless, So it's like when you get there used to be knock on it for not having great food and it was very touristy and all that. But I don't really look at it that way. I look at the overall scheme of things. And I can sit there and have my meal with good company in that space, you know, that's pretty phenomenal for me.
True.
So when we created space, ambience, and good food, I think all of those things lend themselves to the experience, and I think one of the things that happened is that extremism, in that they put so much thought into the space and not enough into the food, or too much into the food and not enough in the space.
And forget
You know,
about the
right,
other. Yeah.
right. So,
Yeah.
so for me, we need true balance. You know, true balance. So it's not about the greatest of everything. It's how do we have that balance?
Mhm.
And when you walk out, you feel like, wow, I've experienced that. You know.
Yeah. Very good. Well, I do want to say thank you for joining us today on our series, Foodways. And I'm thankful that we are experiencing food together, even virtually, and talking about it. And again, a great thank you for being a part of the series and your contribution to the food scene in Toronto and being ever willing to participate and educate us all on culture, on diversity, and just being aware. So once
My
again, thank
pleasure,
you.
my pleasure, and I can't wait to cook with you. I know it's gonna be
That'll be so much
phenomenal.
fun.
All right,
I'm excited as well.
right.
So thank you so much, and everybody else, have a great afternoon or evening or whenever you watch this.
Thank
Thanks a
you,
lot.
Chef. Pleasure.
Thank you.